My name is Marianne Whitmore. I'm 43 years old, a senior forensic accountant with a specialty in fraud detection for medical systems. I'm also a mother. That's what matters most now, not my titles, not the cases I've solved, not even the courtroom wins I used to think were victories. Because right now, my 8-year-old daughter Lena is lying in a hospital bed in the ICU, her small chest barely rising, a ventilator doing half the work her lungs can't handle. Her hands are pale and still. Her heartbeat shows up as tiny green peaks on a monitor beside her. I haven't left this hospital for days. I haven't slept more than an hour at a time. The machines hum, the fluorescent lights flicker. But none of that compares to the panic that crashes over me when a nurse steps in and quietly hands me a clipboard. It's the estimate for the next treatment. I nod, sign, walk back into the hallway and slump into a molded plastic chair. I know I've prepared for this. I've been saving since Lena was diagnosed 3 years ago. Every dollar I didn't spend, I saved for her. Over $1 million in liquid cash, spread across 3 secured accounts: personal, business, and trust. It should be there. It has to be. My phone is already in my hand before I fully realize it. I open my banking app, enter my password. The screen loads, slow, buffering under hospital Wi-Fi, and then numbers appear. Or more precisely, they don't. My checking account shows a balance of 0. My savings account, 0. The trust account, 0. I refresh. Again. My breath shortens. My hands begin to shake. I switch to another card. Declined. Another. Same result. This can't be happening. I step into the corner of the hallway, crouch beside a payphone alcove, and dial my bank. My voice is barely steady enough to speak. Mrs. Whitmore, the rep says after verifying my information, there were multiple transfers last night, all authorized from a registered device, one ending in 2257. My blood turns cold. That's my father's phone. I registered it years ago when I added him as a safety fallback for the trust fund. To whom were the transfers made, I ask, almost choking. I see 2 recipient accounts. One is Ethan Whitmore, the other is Harmony Veteran Fund. Ethan is my brother-in-law, Naomi's husband. Naomi is my younger sister. What's the total amount, I whisper. Combined? $1,050,000. I can't feel my legs. I crouch lower to keep from collapsing. I end the call without saying goodbye. Walk out of the hospital in a fog, numb to the cold night air as I make my way to my car. My daughter is fighting for her life inside, and the money I saved for her survival is gone, drained, by my own family. I drove to Ethan and Naomi's house without thinking. Their porch light was on. Their white Lexus sat in the driveway, gleaming like nothing had ever gone wrong in the world. Naomi opened the door after 3 knocks. She looked at me like I was unexpected, like she didn't already know. Marianne? What? I walked past her. The house smelled like wine and rosemary lamb. Music played softly in the background. A dinner party. Ethan was on the couch, glass in hand, feet propped up. He looked at me and smiled like I was the joke that never gets old. You have some nerve, I said, my voice low but clear. Ethan didn't move. I figured you'd show up eventually. You drained every cent I had, every cent I saved for Lena, for her surgery, her life. He swirled the liquor in his glass. We didn't drain it, Marianne. We redirected it. There's a difference. I didn't blink. You transferred my money without my consent. You used Dad's registered device to authorize it. That's fraud. Ethan raised his eyebrows like a teacher humoring a student. Harmony Fund is legally protected. Your father signed off. The signatures are clean. Naomi was silent, standing behind him like a shadow. Then Ethan said it. The line that etched itself into my bones. We needed it more than you. Just like that. A smirk on his face. A sip of whiskey. Like it was all settled. I stared at him, not saying a word. Not yet. I wanted him to feel like he'd won. I wanted him to believe I was broken. Because the moment he believed that was the moment he lost. So I turned to the door, walked out into the cold, paused at the top step, looked back once, not at him, but at Naomi. You'll want to remember this night, I said, because what's coming next? I didn't have to finish. Boom. Cut to flash forward. The front door crashes open. FBI agents pour in. One voice calls out, Ethan Whitmore, you are under federal investigation for financial fraud, misappropriation of medical trust assets, and wire tampering. Naomi gasps. Ethan stumbles backward. Glass shatters on the floor. And me? I'm standing in the snow outside, calm, watching, waiting for justice to begin. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, planned smart enough, and sacrificed quietly enough, life would eventually reward me with security. Not comfort, not extravagance, just security. That belief held me together during years when everything else fell apart. After Lena's diagnosis, I rebuilt my life around a single purpose: preparing for the day when her health would turn again. I didn't go on vacation. I didn't date. I didn't buy a house with an ocean view like I once dreamed. I poured everything, my time, my career, my energy, into two things: my daughter and the trust fund. Every night after Lena was asleep, I stayed up working, reconciling ledgers, detecting embezzlement for clients, running audits no one else could untangle. Some weeks I billed over 90 hours. Some months I barely spoke to anyone outside of pediatricians and financial advisors. But I kept going because I had a goal: save at least $1 million in liquid, protected assets for Lena. By her 8th birthday, I had done it. 3 accounts: one for immediate medical costs, one for long-term recovery support, and a protected medical trust with special tax exemptions under her name, structured with bulletproof compliance safeguards. I even hired a third-party auditor once a year, just to be sure. So how then? Did it all disappear? After the FBI raid, I spent the rest of the night back in that plastic ICU chair, staring out the window while Lena slept beside machines that blinked and beeped on her behalf. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I kept replaying everything. Where had the breach started? That's when I remembered the folder, a detail so routine at the time, I never thought twice. 3 years ago, when I moved from federal contract work into private financial investigation, I restructured all my accounts to keep Lena's treatment separate from taxable income. I needed a co-signer on file to meet military trust compliance, since the fund was built on income partially earned while under government service. I asked my father, Leonard Whitmore. He was a decorated officer, retired colonel, and still carried weight in military finance circles. He had testified before congressional panels on veteran pension systems. People trusted him. I trusted him. More than that, he was Lena's grandfather. I filled out the authorization paperwork, registered his number as the secondary device. I told myself it was symbolic, a gesture of family continuity. He'd never touch it, I said to myself. I never told Lena. I didn't want her to think that help was conditional or complicated. But now, sitting beside her bed, I could almost hear that voice in my head again. He'd never touch it. Except he had. According to the bank logs, the authorization for the transfers had come from his registered device at 2:36 a.m. on the night before Lena's episode. The timing was cruel, almost surgical. I had been too distracted by her worsening symptoms to check balances or run my usual security sweeps. The records showed that the trust had been emptied in 2 large transfers. The first, $700,000, to Harmony Veteran Fund. The second, $350,000, to a private account held by Ethan Whitmore. Not suspicious activity, not unauthorized access. No red flags had been raised because every login had come from devices I myself had approved. I had signed the paperwork. I had allowed this. Technically, I had given them the keys. That was the hardest part to swallow. I had built a fortress, and then handed over the front gate to the people who were now tearing it down from the inside. Was I too trusting, too focused, too blind? A voice inside me whispered, "No, you weren't blind. You were tired." And they waited for that. I looked down at Lena. Her hand was limp, her fingers curled softly like she was dreaming. I brushed her hair back, kissed her temple, and I promised her right then, no more blind trust. No more paperwork signed for the sake of tradition. No more assuming that blood makes someone safe. I was going to reclaim what was stolen. Not just the money, but the truth, the intention, the faith in something better. Because trust, once broken, doesn't just hurt, it transforms. It strips away illusion. It leaves you raw and clear. And clarity? Clarity is where revenge begins. Naomi asked me to meet her at a quiet cafe near the old high school we both graduated from. It was the kind of place we used to visit as teenagers, back when we thought coffee made us adults and long talks could fix anything. This time, the air between us was different, charged, like something fragile had already snapped, and we were both pretending it could still be taped back together. She was already seated by the window, stirring a cappuccino she wasn't drinking. Her eyes darted to me as I walked in, then down to the table. I took the seat across from her and waited. No greetings, no small talk, just silence. Naomi spoke first. "I didn't know Ethan was going to do it like that," she said quietly, fingers tightening around her mug. "You didn't stop him either," I replied. She winced. "It wasn't supposed to be permanent. He told me you had backup funds, that Lena was stable now." "She's not," I said, sharper than I meant. "And even if she were, what gave either of you the right?" Naomi bit her lip, then looked at me fully. "Do you have any idea what it's like living next to you?" That caught me off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" She leaned forward slightly. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired, maybe even wounded. "It means you've always had everything locked down. Perfect grades, high-paying jobs, backup plans to your backup plans. You walk into a room and everyone just assumes you'll fix it. No one ever asks if we need help, because you're the one they trust with all the answers." "That's not fair," I said quietly. "No," she agreed. "But it's true." I sat back, my mind racing, not because I hadn't heard things like this before, but because I didn't expect to hear it from her. Naomi continued, "I'm not saying what Ethan did was okay. I'm saying we were drowning, and you never noticed." "I noticed," I said. "I just assumed you'd ask. You never did." Her eyes flickered. "And you? You never asked me what I needed. You just kept being you." That hit harder than I cared to admit, because in that moment I saw it clearly, how the people closest to me had rewritten my role. I wasn't a sister, or a daughter, or a woman. I was a machine, the cold, rational breadwinner, the emotionless calculator, the one who pays, the one who never cracks. Somewhere along the way, my sacrifices had stopped looking like love and started looking like distance. And Naomi, she had mistaken my silence for judgment. "I thought we were family," I said. "We are," she replied. "But families break when no one knows how to talk anymore." I looked at her, really looked at her. Behind the tired eyes and tight jaw was a sister who had lived in my shadow too long. A woman who had built her own silent resentment while smiling through birthdays and holiday dinners. She hadn't just stood beside Ethan because he was her husband. She stood there because, in her mind, I'd stopped being someone she could reach. I stood up, heart heavy but strangely clear. "I would have given you anything," I said, "if you had just asked." Naomi's lips parted, but she didn't speak. I didn't wait for her to. As I walked out of that cafe, one truth clung to me like smoke. This wasn't just about stolen money. It was about everything no one said until it was too late. About roles assigned, resentment unspoken, and love stretched so thin it finally tore. And maybe it had been tearing for years. When I told Clarence everything, he didn't blink. He simply said, "Give me 24 hours. Clarence Alvarez wasn't just my old army contact. He was one of the few people I still trusted with both my reputation and my silence. We'd worked together years ago during a contract audit on veteran housing fraud. He in field operations, me buried in spreadsheets and signatures. While I chased numbers, he chased people. And if anyone could peel back the shiny exterior of Harmony Fund, it was Clarence. The next morning, he showed up at the hospital with a folder thicker than my daughter's medical file. He laid it flat on the waiting room table, opened it slowly, and said, "Marianne, I think we're looking at something a whole lot bigger than you getting robbed." I leaned forward, scanning the first page. IRS filings. The name, Harmony Veteran Fund. Listed as a 501c3, supposedly founded to support transitional housing for disabled vets. Its stated mission, upholding the dignity of American heroes. The signatures, Ethan Whitmore, Chief Financial Officer, Chair of the Board, my father, Colonel Leonard Whitmore, retired. I kept reading. Donation cycles, grant disbursements, Hundreds of thousands funneled through shell accounts, one-off corporate donors with no web presence, event receipts that didn't match venue capacity, invoices for services from companies that didn't exist more than 6 months. And then, on the final page, PR coverage. Legacy of the Brave, a veteran podcast and livestream show, hosted weekly by none other than Marianne Whitmore. Studio funded by the Harmony Fund, featured guests, minor politicians, ex-service members, public figures hungry for a platform. My hands curled slowly into fists. Ethan wasn't just laundering money, he was polishing it. Every dollar stolen had been repackaged in red, white, and blue, covered in eagles and slogans. And no one looked closely because questioning patriotism in public is like spitting in church. They built a narrative, Clarence said, one that makes anyone who criticizes them look un-American. Harmony Fund became a shield. And your father, he handed them the sword. I felt a twist in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. A slow-burning realization that this wasn't just betrayal. It was betrayal dressed in honor. Ethan didn't even need to hide the theft. He made it look like service. And my father, he lent his military credibility to the scheme, knowing full well no one would suspect a decorated colonel, especially one who wore his medals to every board meeting and gave stirring speeches about duty beyond the battlefield. I vouched for him, I whispered. Clarence nodded. And he used that trust to build a network, not just donors. He's roped in young veterans, desperate families, even a few politicians looking for photo ops. What about the money they stole from me? Already moved through 5 shell companies, he said. But here's the thing, because it came from a protected medical trust for Lena, there's a compliance trail, a strong one. That was the only sliver of hope I clung to. I looked back down at the folder. There was a printout from a recent livestream Ethan hosted, his smug face frozen mid-sentence on the thumbnail. The title, Legacy of the Brave, Fighting for Vets When the System Fails. I almost laughed, bitterly. He wasn't fighting the system. He was the system, rigged, polished, profitable. And me? I had been silent too long. Clarence stood. I'll draft the first intel brief and pass it up the chain. But Marianne, this won't be fast. They've armored themselves in patriotism. I rose beside him. Then we'll have to be sharper than the armor. Because if they thought my silence was consent, they were about to find out what happens when a woman stops being polite and starts being forensic. I didn't plan to watch the show. I told myself I wouldn't give him the view count. I told myself I'd keep my head down and work the legal channels. Let the facts speak louder than any screen ever could. But curiosity and fury, they're persistent things. It was a quiet night in the ICU. Lena was stable for the moment, her breathing slow, machines humming with false peace. I sat curled in the recliner with a blanket over my knees, one eye on her vitals, the other on the glowing screen of my laptop. I typed in the name, Legacy of the Brave. The latest episode was pinned at the top of the channel, streamed just hours earlier. Its thumbnail? Ethan, front and center, grinning like a war hero under stage lights. The title read, Sacrifice at Home, When Giving Hurts and Why It's Worth It. I clicked. The intro was all cinematic flair, American flags, old war footage, music swelling like a campaign ad. Then Ethan's voice filled the room. There are moments, he said, when we have to choose between personal comfort and a greater cause. My stomach turned. Ethan appeared on screen, seated in a leather chair, his posture too perfect. Like he was trying to sell me something. I guess he was. A few months ago, he continued, my family made a hard decision, a financial one that not everyone understood. But we did it for a reason, to serve those who've served us. I leaned closer, my hands gripping the armrests. We redirected funds, he said, smiling slightly, from a personal trust toward the Harmony Veteran Fund. No one made us. No court ordered it. We chose it. Because we believe that real patriotism requires sacrifice. I felt something tighten in my chest. He was talking about Lena's medical trust, about my daughter's lifeline, and calling it a donation. We've been criticized, he went on, by those who think family comes first. But sometimes, family means leading by example. and I couldn't be prouder of what we've done. I froze. He was rebranding theft as virtue. The comments section was flooded with support. What a hero. This is the kind of man we need in Congress. Bless you and your family for your sacrifice. Sacrifice? You stole from a sick child. You gutted the only plan standing between her and financial ruin. You dressed it in flags and applause, and called it honor. I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat. My eyes blurred, fists clenched so tight, my nails left crescent moons in my palms. He was smiling. He had no shame. And the worst part? He believed it. He believed his own myth. I paused the video, his face frozen mid-sentence, one hand raised like he was giving a sermon. In that still frame, I saw the man he had become. Not just a thief, not just a liar, a manipulator of truth. He hadn't just stolen from me. He had rewritten the story, cast himself as the protagonist, framed our pain as his platform, and no one was questioning it. The room around me felt too small, the machines too loud. I stood up abruptly, pacing, tears burning in my eyes. Lena stirred slightly. Her small hand reached toward me, even in sleep. I froze. I walked to her side, took her hand gently, and whispered, "They don't get to win, baby. I promise you, they don't. Because if they were going to turn this into theater, I was going to change the ending." They thought I was a background character in their story. But they'd forgotten one thing about accountants. We always keep receipts. And mine were just getting started. The morning I met Harriet Bloom, I was running on caffeine and anger. Lena's condition had stabilized again, which gave me just enough time and emotional bandwidth to hunt the truth with surgical precision. Clarence had arranged the meeting, said she was the best forensic accountant he'd ever worked with. The kind of woman, he told me, who can smell a cooked book from across the room. We met in a tiny office above a quiet law firm in Arlington. Harriet was in her mid-60s, sharp as a blade in both mind and manner. Her gray curls were clipped back neatly, and she wore a navy blue blazer over a turtleneck that somehow made her look both kind and terrifying. She didn't waste time. Clarence briefed me. "You want to build a case for financial abuse, wire fraud, and misuse of trust funds," she said, flipping open a yellow notepad. "I'll need 3 things." I nodded, heart pounding. 1, she held up a finger. Original contracts or authorization documents that allowed Ethan or your father access to the trust. Full versions, not scans. With notarization dates, I pulled out the red accordion folder I'd prepared, slid it across the table. 2, she continued. Any email threads, text messages, or communications showing intent or lack thereof. If you never approved the transaction, I need digital footprints proving that. I nodded again. I've got access to all my email backups. I never received any consent request or notification before the funds were moved. She raised an eyebrow, scribbled a note. 3, Harriet said, tapping her pen slowly. A handwriting comparison. If you suspect forged signatures, I'll need several clean samples from your father, and from you. We'll compare them to the signatures on the withdrawal authorization. At that, my jaw tightened. I always signed the account actions myself, but last year, when Lena's condition got worse, I authorized my father as a temporary financial advisor, limited powers of attorney. I never thought. Harriet looked up. That's how they got in. I didn't expect him to use it, I muttered. It was a formality. It's never a formality when money's involved, she said. She stood, walked to a filing cabinet, and pulled out a magnifier and a small blacklight pen. Then she laid out the original document I had given her, the one authorizing the transfer of over $1 million. May I? She asked. Please. She studied the signature block. My name, Marianne Whitmore, written in neat cursive at the bottom. But under the magnifier, she began to hum softly. This is interesting, she murmured. What? She flipped open a notebook, pulled out a signature you'd find on every single tax document I'd ever filed, something I had emailed Clarence the night before. Then she looked at me. You see this loop on the M here? I leaned in. It's flat, she said. Yours has a flourish. Whoever signed this mimicked your writing, but their pressure is inconsistent. See how the ink here is heavier on the right stroke of the W? My stomach dropped. You're saying it's forged? She nodded slowly. It's a very good forgery. But yes, it wasn't you. My mind raced. Someone, probably my father, had replicated my signature to authorize the transfer. Not just unethical, criminal. Harriet sat back, folded her arms. This is enough to subpoena bank surveillance footage and metadata logs. If you want to take this to federal court, Marianne, we'll need to move methodically. This is no longer just family business. I looked down at Lena's photo in my wallet, her tiny smile, her fighter's eyes, then back at Harriet. Let's build the case, I said. She nodded once. Then you'll need to go back to the beginning, find the first breach. Every small detail. I took a breath, the kind that reaches into your bones. I hadn't wanted a war, but they'd brought it to my doorstep, dressed in patriotism, masked in family ties. Now, I had Harriet, and more importantly, I had truth. On paper, in ink, ready to burn through the lies. The room was dim, lit only by the low blue pulse of machines keeping track of Lena's fragile breath. The nurses had just finished their rounds, whispering softly, adjusting tubes and monitors with practiced hands. And then it was quiet again, that kind of sacred silence only hospitals seem to know. I stood by her bed, rubbing my arms, watching her chest rise and fall beneath the thin blanket. I couldn't sleep, not with everything circling in my mind. Harriet's discoveries, the forged signature, Ethan's lies. My mind was a storm. Lena was the eye of it. That's when I noticed her fingers move, barely. Just a twitch, but then again, stronger. She reached up, slow, as if trying to grasp something unseen. I leaned in, taking her hand gently, and then I saw it. Wrapped around her tiny wrist was the gold chain from my mother, her grandmother's necklace. Lena shouldn't have had it. I'd left it locked in a keepsake box in my dresser, tucked away since the funeral. My mother had always worn it, a small gold pendant in the shape of a lantern, simple, etched with a single word on the back. Endure. I stared. How had Lena gotten it? And then I remembered. Naomi. She'd visited Lena the day before, brought her a stuffed bear, and left without saying much. She must have taken the necklace and given it to her. Lena's fingers wrapped around the pendant like it was a lifeline. Her eyelids fluttered and her lips moved faintly. No words, just breathe. I sat down beside her and held her hand tighter. My mother used to say that justice didn't need to roar. That real strength often sounded like silence. She was a courtroom interpreter, spent decades translating for people who had no voice in front of the law. You don't have to shout to be heard, she once told me. Some truths speak in stillness. Some light only shines when the noise dies down. She called it the light in silence. I hadn't understood it then, but now it made sense. I'd been trained for noise, for courtroom debates and high-stakes audits, for the Cold War of financial documents, late nights, and factual annihilation. I believed in evidence, in logic, in justice, but loud, relentless justice. But that wasn't going to bring Lena peace. And maybe it wasn't going to bring me peace either. The gold chain glinted slightly under the ICU light. It wasn't valuable, not in money, but it had survived wars, relocations, loss. It had survived her. And now it was wrapped around the hand of the one person I'd do anything for. My daughter didn't need me to shout. She needed me to endure betrayal without letting it twist me into someone else, to endure the humiliation of being lied to endure the silence of being dismissed, the weight of being misunderstood, and still stand, still acting, still choose the quiet, steady kind of justice that left no blood but carved deep truths into stone. That was the light. That was her light. My mother's. Lena's. Mine. I kissed Lena's forehead and whispered, "You hold on to that chain, baby. It's older than any lie they ever told." I stood, straightened my coat, and walked out of the room. I didn't need to yell. I had Harriet's reports. I had forged signatures. I had motive, timeline, and leverage. And I had silence. Not the defeated kind, but the kind that listens, learns, and prepares. The kind that glows in the dark, quietly, but steadily. It was time to turn that light outward. The truth, Harriet once told me, doesn't whisper. It waits, quietly, patiently, until the moment it can roar in your place. That moment came 3 days after Lena opened her eyes. I was in Harriet's office again, a mug of cold coffee by my elbow and a stack of paper thick enough to choke a printer in front of me. Harriet had been digging deeper, not just into the documents, but into the metadata, the pen strokes, the ink age. She hadn't been looking for what was there, but for what shouldn't be. She turned to her screen and said calmly, "I have something for you." She tapped play. A side-by-side comparison of two signatures filled the screen. One was mine, lifted from federal payroll files and my mortgage documents. The other was the one on the $1 million withdrawal slip. Then she brought up a third window, a synthetic learning model designed by an AI handwriting replication tool. Harriet explained it as if I'd been trained in neural nets, which of course I hadn't. "All you need to know," she said, "is that the machine confirms with 94% certainty that the forged signature was generated from at least 6 samples of your previous documents. Not written by a human hand, typed and translated by machine learning, likely fed by someone who had access to your files." I froze. My father had access. My father, who I'd once trusted more than any man on earth. Harriet leaned back, folded her arms. "This isn't just forgery, it's cyber-assisted fraud. And with the level of premeditation involved, this bumps up to federal." She clicked another file open. "It gets better." A grainy video filled the screen, shaky, clearly recorded on a phone, the angle tilted slightly. The audio crackled, but the voices were sharp. "Enough." Clarence's voice. "You sure you can handle another round, Ethan?" Ethan slurring. "Man, please. After what I pulled off with the Whitmore account, I can do anything." I had her signature printed. AI did the rest. "She still thinks her dad just moved the money. Pfft, amateur." My jaw clenched. He laughed on screen, lifted a shot glass, and added, "Legacy of the brave, baby. We're all heroes now, right?" Clarence had recorded the video 2 weeks ago, baiting Ethan with drinks at a charity event he knew would end messy. He didn't have a warrant for the footage, but it didn't matter. In court, it wouldn't hold weight. But in the public sphere, it would burn like gasoline. "You're not planning to leak this, are you?" I asked Harriet. She gave me a slow smile. "Not me." I understood. It had to be me. I walked out of her office that day with a flash drive, a folder of forensics reports, and a choice. For weeks, Ethan had painted himself as a philanthropist. On local talk shows, veterans podcasts, and short-form media reels. He claimed our family made a quiet sacrifice to support underfunded veterans in rural America. He positioned himself as the face of nobility, using the money I had earned to polish his halo. But now he was about to choke on his own words. I uploaded the video to a whistleblower subreddit first, under a pseudonym. Then I emailed it anonymously to 3 investigative journalists Clarence knew personally. One of them worked for the Daily Ledger, another for Second Front, a nonprofit exposing military grift. It didn't take long. Within 48 hours, the video had been clipped, subtitled, reposted. Reaction videos flooded in. Hashtags trended. # stolen valor, # Whitmore fraud, # AI forger. Public opinion turned fast. Ethan's scheduled appearance on a National Military Pride segment was pulled. Harmony Fund's website was temporarily shut down due to suspicious activity. The veteran community, which had once applauded his mission, started demanding receipts. I didn't say a word publicly, not yet, because this wasn't about vengeance, it was about momentum. And momentum, once started, doesn't need shouting, it just needs truth. And now, truth had a video. Truth had a voice. Mine. There's a moment, right before impact, where everything feels still. Like the breath you take before a courtroom verdict, or the second before a door creaks open and changes everything behind it. That's what it felt like the moment I hit send on the email to Dana Kruger. Dana wasn't just any reporter. She was the kind who never showed her face on screen, but had a voice like a scalpel, sharp, exact, and impossible to ignore. She ran a late-night investigative segment on public radio and freelanced exposés that left no room for mercy. Clarence had vouched for her. "She doesn't chase stories, she hunts truths," he'd said. The file I sent her included Harriet's forensics report, Ethan's drunken confession, and the metadata trail proving cyber-assisted forgery. I signed the message anonymously, but ended with one line. "If this were your daughter lying in an ICU bed, would you let them get away with it?" She replied in 4 words, Consider it lit, Whitmore. 12 hours later, the fire began. I sat in Lena's room, sunlight creeping through the slats in the blinds, when the first segment aired on Dana's channel. It started with an old photo of me in uniform, taken at Camp Pendleton nearly 15 years ago. Young, sharp-eyed, still untouched by bureaucracy. Then the image faded to a quiet hospital hallway. Dana's voice cut through the air. Tonight, we bring you the story of a decorated military accountant, a mother whose trust was shattered, not by war or strangers, but by her own blood. The clip of Ethan played next, blurry, slurred, damning. Whitmore account. AI did the rest. She still thinks her dad just moved the money. Dana didn't editorialize. She let the footage hang like smoke. Then the narration returned, calm but heavy. The $1 million withdrawal was taken from a fund reserved for medical emergencies. That money was meant to save a child's life. Instead, it was funneled into a self-congratulatory media campaign, built on the ashes of betrayal. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. I just kept staring at Lena's fingers, still wrapped around that gold pendant, still fighting, still silent, still enduring. By morning, hashtags began to surface. Let Lena live. Stolen light. Whitmore truth. But it was Let Lena Live that caught fire. People began stitching her story into short reels. Digital artists recreated Lena's silhouette in hospital blue, hand gripping the pendant, face turned to a window of light. They paired it with quotes from Dana's report. Some even took clips from Ethan's show, overlaying his smug grin with bold red letters. Liar, forger, thief. What surprised me most was how quiet it all felt on my end. No paparazzi. No press banging on my door. Just the current. A quiet current pulling the story outward, carried by people who saw something in it. Not just a scandal, but a warning. A mirror. I watched from the sidelines as my own name became an echo. Not loud, not dramatic, just consistent. Comments flooded in. My dad did this to my mom. She couldn't fight back. Thank you, Marianne. She didn't scream. She didn't burn bridges. She just exposed the truth. That's the kind of justice I want for my family. Let Lena live. Let all our daughters live. This is what fighting looks like. Somewhere between those digital ripples, I became something I hadn't asked to be. A symbol. The silent mother. The woman who didn't rage but revealed. The calm in the courtroom. Dana followed up 2 days later with a follow-up piece, an op-ed this time. In it, she wrote, Marianne Whitmore's greatest weapon wasn't the law or media or even her military discipline. It was restraint. In a time where outrage is currency, she chose precision. And it worked. I saved that line, printed it, folded it into Lena's memory box. One day, when she was stronger, I'd show her what quiet strength looked like. But that day wasn't yet. First, I had one more card to play. They say a lie needs speed. Truth can afford to wait. Ethan chose speed. 3 days after Dana's exposé went viral, he called a press conference. It was hosted in a gleaming atrium downtown, flanked by banners of the Harmony Fund and the ever-patriotic slogan, Legacy of the Brave. I didn't go. I didn't need to. I watched it from Lena's room. She was finally breathing without a ventilator, her fingers warm and her eyes flickering beneath closed lids like she was chasing a dream she couldn't catch. Naomi stood behind him on stage. Her arms were crossed, her jaw clenched too tightly, and though she wore the Harmony Fund pin, her eyes didn't match its shine. They looked hollow, like a reflection with no source of light. Ethan adjusted the mic. He wore his usual navy blue blazer and a smirk so subtle it could pass as concern to anyone not paying attention. Let me begin by saying, he said, voice steady, these allegations are as false as they are hurtful. My wife and I have dedicated our lives to supporting veterans and underprivileged communities. What we're witnessing is not justice. It's a personal vendetta, a desperate attempt to ruin good work. He went on. He didn't deny the AI. He didn't deny the forged signature. Instead, he spun it. He claimed the signature had been pre-approved, an old form digitally signed and misunderstood. He accused Dana Kruger of editing the video maliciously. He labeled Clarence a rogue former agent with a grudge. He even referenced me. My sister-in-law, he said, has been under immense emotional stress. Her daughter's condition has understandably caused confusion. I don't hold it against her. I only wish she'd spoken to us before going public. The moment he said that, I almost dropped my coffee. Confusion. That word, how small it sounded compared to betrayal. Naomi said nothing. She just stood there, still as granite. A few reporters asked questions, but Ethan deflected them with ease. One dared to bring up the whistleblower subreddit. That was an anonymous coward, he replied. I work in the light. He ended the conference with what he thought was grace. A hand over his heart, a nod to the camera, and the line, "We will continue our mission, regardless of this smear campaign." I turned off the TV. Clarence texted me seconds later. Damage control, sloppy but fast. Public split. And he was right. Social media exploded, again. But this time it fractured. Some comments called me bitter. A scorned woman attacking her family. Others believed Ethan's Patriot Act. Routine. There were even people accusing me of weaponizing my daughter's illness for attention. But those weren't the ones that stuck with me. It was the people in the middle, the ones unsure. They said things like, "This is getting murky. I don't know who to believe anymore. Why is the sister staying silent? If she has the proof, why not press charges?" I knew then. The press conference wasn't Ethan's defense. It was his offense. He wanted to drag us both into the mud until no one remembered who'd thrown the first punch. It was working. Harriet called that night. She didn't say hello. "Time to act," she said. "You have the forensic report. You have the whistleblower protection clause. You have the motive and the proof." I hesitated. "If I go legal, there's no going back." There was a pause. Then, "You've already crossed that line, Marianne. Now make it count." I looked over at Lena. Her eyes were open, barely, but they were searching. Not for my anger, not for my revenge, for my strength. I picked up the phone, called my attorney, and then I called Dana. "Let's go public," I said. Not as a victim, as a witness, because if Ethan wanted a war, I wasn't going to fight it with fire. I had the law. And this time, the law had me. Filing the civil suit felt less like vengeance and more like gravity, an inevitability that pulled everything down to where it belonged. The truth. I walked into the courthouse that morning in a plain navy suit. No makeup, no fanfare. Just a folder under my arm and Harriet by my side. Her eyes scanned everything, always alert, always calculating. She never said much unless it mattered. That's why I trusted her. The courtroom wasn't packed, but it didn't need to be. Dana sat in the third row, typing live notes for an exclusive. Clarence leaned against the back wall like he didn't belong there, like he was watching a puzzle that had almost solved itself. Naomi didn't show. Ethan arrived late, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he cost more than my college tuition. He didn't look at me, not once, just checked his watch and whispered to his counsel. But that's not what shook me. It was my father, Leonard Whitmore, retired Air Force, former lieutenant colonel, my once silent guardian, my moral compass, the man who taught me how to box up feelings and solve problems with spreadsheets. He sat in the witness bench, summoned. He looked older than I remembered, thinner, smaller somehow. Like the truth had been draining him slowly for years. I watched the judge enter, we all stood, and the dance began. Harriet took the stand first, calm and professional. She walked through the forensic analysis, how the deepfake signature had been generated, how it mimicked my hand motion patterns, even my pressure points. She presented timestamps, IP traces, inconsistencies. Then came Clarence, offering chain of custody proof for the video of Ethan, admitting the use of pre-authorization while intoxicated. The court allowed it, barely. It was shaky, but it helped. Then, Leonard. The judge called his name. He stood, adjusted his tie like he was about to give a speech at a funeral, and walked slowly to the witness stand. I held my breath. No one, not even Harriet, knew what he was going to say. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, then sat. The attorney began the questions. "Mr. Whitmore, you were listed as a co-consultant on the Harmony Fund. Can you describe your involvement?" He nodded once. "I was asked by Ethan to help draft the fund's mission structure. He told me it would serve veterans, provide direct aid. And you agreed? At first, yes. I believed in the purpose. And did you know that your daughter's account was used to fund this initiative? There was a long pause. I did, he said softly. A murmur rose in the room. Did you approve it? Another pause. Then he looked at me, not around me, not past me, at me. And that's when he spoke, not to the court, but to me. I failed you, he said. I thought I was doing something noble. I thought I was making up for the lives I couldn't save during my service. He glanced down at his hands, then back up. I believed Ethan when he said you'd never notice, that it was for a cause greater than any one person. I thought I was finally being useful. Tears stung the corners of my eyes, but I held them back. I sacrificed the wrong person, he said finally. And it's time to make that right. No dramatic gasp, no shouting, just silence, the thick kind that settles over a courtroom like dust after an explosion. Harriet leaned over and squeezed my wrist. Clarence nodded once. The judge allowed a short recess. As we stood, Leonard approached me slowly. His voice was low, almost breaking. I'm sorry, Marianne. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'll testify to every single detail. I nodded, but didn't hug him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I met his eyes. And for the first time in years, they didn't look like they were hiding something. He walked back to the stand. And I walked back to Lena. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, I wasn't the only one swinging. The hallway outside Lena's ICU room had become a second home. Sterile, quiet, and honest in a way life rarely is. There's no space for pretenses when someone you love is fighting to breathe. I'd learned to live in that stillness. That morning, just past 8 o'clock, I saw Naomi standing at the end of the corridor. She didn't belong there. Her designer coat, flawless makeup, and sculpted composure. She looked like she'd taken a wrong turn on her way to a charity gala. But her eyes were swollen, and her hands, clutching a manila envelope, were trembling. She didn't speak as she walked toward me, didn't offer a smile or ask permission. She just stopped, 2 feet away, and said softly, "Is she awake?" I nodded. "She's been in and out, mostly sleeping." She looked through the glass panel into Lena's room. The little girl hooked up to monitors, fighting with every cell in her tiny body. Naomi exhaled, almost like it hurt. Then she turned and handed me the envelope. I looked at it. "What is this?" "My divorce filing," she said. "It's signed." I didn't know what to say. She looked down, fidgeting with her ring, then slowly pulled it off her finger. I dropped it off with the clerk. "This one's your copy." I hesitated. "Why now?" Naomi let out a breath that cracked halfway through. "I watched him throw you under the bus on national television. I stood there like a prop while he painted you unstable and delusional. I thought I could handle it. I thought I owed it to him, to us." She swallowed hard. "But when he said your grief was clouding your memory, when he dismissed Lena like she was just collateral damage," she trailed off, then met my eyes. That was the moment I realized I'd spent years with a man who didn't believe in anything but himself. There was silence between us, but not the cold kind. The kind that asked to be heard without interruption. Naomi went on, "I wanted to be part of something. Ethan gave me a cause, a mission. I thought that was love. But he never fought for me, Marianne. Not once. He just pulled me along and called it partnership." She looked back through the window. "I see Lena in there, fighting harder than most grown men I've met. And you, standing in this hallway, day after day, without screaming or folding. You made me realize I don't know what strength looks like until now." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger, not pity. Something closer to mourning. The kind you feel for a version of someone that never really existed. Naomi looked at me again, but her eyes were clearer now. "I was never brave enough to question him," she whispered. "But watching you, facing this hell with nothing but truth and spine, I couldn't pretend anymore." She stepped forward and placed the envelope in my hand, then squeezed it briefly before pulling back. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I just needed you to know, I see it now. I see you now." I looked at the envelope, then back at her. "You had a choice," I said, my voice low. "And you finally made one." Naomi nodded. She turned to leave but stopped after a few steps. "If it helps the case. I have the documents Ethan kept off-site. If financial trails, communications. I'll hand them to Harriet. I blinked. That would help more than she knew. Thank you, I said quietly. She gave me one last look, part regret, part relief, then walked away, her heels echoing down the sterile corridor. I slipped the envelope into my bag and walked into Lena's room. Her hand was still wrapped around the little pendant from my mother, the symbol of quiet light. I sat beside her and brushed her hair off her forehead. You're stronger than all of them, I whispered. And today, someone else saw that too. Maybe Naomi's awakening wouldn't undo the damage, but it proved something vital. Even in a house full of betrayal, the truth could still find a crack and break through. And maybe, just maybe, someone else could too. The courtroom smelled like cold wood, old air, and nerves. I sat in the front row, hands folded in my lap, as the judge entered. It had taken over a year to get here. Months of digging, documenting, and doing what my military training had taught me best. Observe in silence, then strike with precision. To my right sat Harriet, calm, focused, unblinking. On my left was Clarence, quietly scrolling through news coverage on his phone. The public had caught wind of the scandal weeks ago. The Harmony Fund, once praised for its veteran outreach programs, now stood accused of orchestrating one of the most elaborate donor fraud operations in recent history. At the defense table, Ethan sat stone-faced in a tailored gray suit. He looked thinner than before, less charismatic without the lights of a TV studio and the illusion of heroism. Naomi wasn't with him. She hadn't been for months. The judge's voice echoed. The court finds the defendant, Ethan Merrick Hale, guilty on all counts of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit identity theft, and the unlawful misappropriation of non-profit funds. My chest didn't rise in triumph. No fist pumps, no tears, just stillness. The same kind I'd learned to live in during Lena's nights in ICU, the kind that let you breathe without needing to speak. The sentence, 12 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole before 8. His attorney nodded, expression unreadable. I glanced at Ethan only once. For the first time, he didn't smirk. Next came the ruling on Harmony Fund. The judge ordered the nonprofit's immediate dissolution. All remaining assets would be seized, audited, and redistributed through court-approved veteran charities. The name Harmony would no longer be associated with service, but with scandal. And then, my father. Leonard Whitmore wasn't on trial. Not directly, but when the prosecution presented the forensic findings, his name on approvals, his blind eye signatures, his failure to report suspicious transactions, the courtroom air grew heavier. He hadn't spoken publicly since the investigation began. He didn't today either, but as he left the courtroom after the verdict, surrounded by aides and avoiding cameras, he looked at me, just for a second. A flicker of something crossed his face. Regret, maybe, or shame. It was hard to tell. That man had always worn silence like armor. He released a quiet statement the following morning. I am stepping back from all public service roles indefinitely. I have failed to meet the standards I once demanded of others. That failure begins and ends with me. It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever receive. But I didn't need it anymore. I didn't attend the press conference that followed. Didn't stand in front of microphones or give exclusive interviews. I left that to Harriet and Clarence. They knew how to manage the media without losing their souls. Instead, I went home, to Lena. She was stronger now, off machines, breathing freely. Her color had returned, and so had her laughter, small, bright, and fierce. We sat on the back porch that night, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun set behind the pine trees. She leaned into me, her head resting just below my chin. Did the bad people go away, Mommy? She asked softly. I paused before answering. They can't hurt us anymore, I said. And we're safe. That's what matters. She nodded, satisfied, and closed her eyes. I looked out at the horizon. My name had been dragged through tabloids, dissected on comment threads, twisted on podcasts. Some called me heartless for not protecting my family. Others saw me as a quiet hero. But I didn't need their versions of me. I knew who I was. I was the woman who didn't scream when they stole from her, who didn't break when her child nearly died, who didn't seek revenge, but pursued truth. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. And now, with Lena beside me and the shadows behind us, I finally allowed myself to exhale, not in victory, in peace. The day Lena was discharged from the hospital, the air smelled different, like something new had begun. It wasn't spring yet, but it felt like it. The nurse handed me Lena's discharge papers and whispered, "She's a miracle," and she was. Not because she lived, but because she stayed soft after everything. I helped her into her coat, still 2 sizes too big, and buckled her shoes like I did when she was a toddler. She reached up, tugged gently on my sleeve, and said, "Can we go somewhere warm now, Mommy?" We didn't go home right away. Instead, we drove to Lucille's bench, my mother's bench, under the old birch tree by the lake. It was quiet there, untouched by everything that had tried to break us. I sat down first. Lena climbed into my lap, her head resting against my chest, small breaths syncing with mine. I whispered, "You did so good, baby." She didn't say anything, just nodded, eyes still open. Watching the sunlight shift across the water, after a while, I opened my phone. Not to scroll, not to read headlines, not to check balances. I opened a note I'd started long ago but never finished. A plan, a dream, a promise. It began with a name, Lucille Light Foundation. I'd written it during the first week Lena was in ICU, when sleep came in minutes and hope came in pieces. I didn't know then what I was fighting for, just that I couldn't let her go. I couldn't let the darkness win. Now I had the settlement. The court had ordered full restitution of the $1,050,000 Ethan had stolen. The media called it a landmark judgment for financial abuse within families. I didn't care about the headlines, but the money? That could mean something if I used it right. That night, I made the first call. By the end of the week, the foundation was registered. By the end of the month, it had a home. And by the end of that season, it had a mission: to support single parents and caregivers facing catastrophic medical costs, quietly, respectfully, like my mother would have. I hired a small staff, honest people, people who knew struggle, not from books, but from life. And then I did something no one expected. I asked Naomi to join. She didn't answer right away. She came to Lena's next checkup, brought her a sketchbook, and stood awkwardly in the hallway until I invited her in. She looked different, less polished, more real. The weight of silence had reshaped her. I could see it in her shoulders, her eyes. She sat beside me as Lena slept during her IV. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, I said, "The foundation needs someone who understands the cost of loyalty and the price of looking away." Naomi's voice was almost too soft to hear. "You really want me?" "I want someone who's been through the fire," I said, and came out willing to do better. That night, she signed on as Director of Community Relations. Her first project? Building a scholarship fund for veterans' children, named in honor of Lena. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It's not always in the courtroom or on a headline. Sometimes it's in the quiet choices you make when no one's watching. Lena's hair grew back. She started dancing again, spinning in circles in the hallway with socks on, laughing the way only kids can, fully, without permission. Every time she smiled, I felt my mother's hands on my shoulders, steadying me, reminding me, light doesn't scream, it shines. People ask me why I didn't stay angry, why I didn't keep pushing, keep punishing. But they don't understand. Anger is heavy. It takes up space where healing should be. And besides, the world had already seen what Ethan was made of. Now it was time they saw what we were made of. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. No return address. Just my name, written in the handwriting I hadn't seen since the courtroom, Leonard's, my father. I stood in the hallway of the foundation's new office, the envelope heavy in my hands despite weighing next to nothing. For a long while, I just stared at it. There had been enough words, enough betrayal dressed in polite language, enough silence sharp as a blade. I thought about throwing it away, but I didn't. I took it into the quiet of my office, sat at the desk, and turned it over with steady fingers. I didn't open it like a daughter opening something from her father. I opened it like an auditor, prepared, precise. His writing was still exact, straight like a ruler. Decades of military discipline baked into every stroke. Marianne, if you're reading this, It means I had to wait until everything quieted down. I wasn't sure if I had the right to send this, but I needed to try. I paused. I'd grown up hearing those words. I needed to try, from soldiers explaining their choices, from officers making sense of commands. It was the phrase people used when justifying things too heavy to carry out right. I watched the trial, every moment of it. I didn't flinch when the truth came out. I didn't call to apologize, because I knew I didn't deserve your voice on the other end. I didn't show up at the verdict, because shame makes cowards of men like me. He'd always been proud, clean boots, firm handshakes, every speech about duty and honor memorized. But there had been cracks even back then, moments when my mother looked away at family dinners, or when Naomi asked him something and his answer was just a look. He never yelled. He didn't have to. He withdrew. I believed Ethan because it was convenient, because he made me feel like my legacy still mattered, that this so-called Harmony Fund was a tribute to men like me. What I didn't see was that it was a monument to my own blindness. I remembered that moment in court when Harriet pulled up the financial authorization. Leonard's signature, my own forged. Ethan grinning. Leonard didn't flinch, didn't blink, just looked straight ahead like he was back in uniform, standing at attention, even as everything he built was burning in the background. You trusted me with your accounts when you went to war, when you were 22, and thought service meant survival. And I failed you. I failed you in ways I never failed the soldiers under my command. You weren't a soldier to me. You were just my daughter. I stopped reading. That line, you were just my daughter, not my equal, not a fellow veteran, not someone I believed in, just my daughter. It explained everything, didn't it? How he'd dismissed my concerns over Harmony Fund, how he never asked about Lena's diagnosis, how he'd nodded at Ethan's speeches, but never read a single one of my financial statements. I hadn't been a person to him. I'd been a proof of lineage. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know I've resigned from every veterans board. I've withdrawn from public engagements. I donated the speaking fees from my last 3 events to the Lucille Light Foundation, anonymously. You'll find the record under a different name. I didn't want headlines, just repair. My hands trembled, not with rage, but something quieter. Sadness, maybe, regret. The kind that doesn't demand justice, only acknowledgement. Thank you for not letting me hurt you a second time by answering. That silence was your gift to me. It told me everything I needed to hear. That line, that silence was your gift to me, cut deeper than the rest. Because he was right. I hadn't written back. I hadn't visited. I hadn't shouted or sought closure or demanded anything from him. I'd simply walked away, quietly. Because sometimes the loudest justice is no justice at all. Just living, just breathing, just standing on your own legs, unshaken. At the end, he'd sign the letter the way he used to sign my report cards in high school. With pride I never showed, Leonard. I didn't cry. I folded the letter once, then again, and slid it back into its envelope. I placed it in the drawer beneath Lena's old hospital ID band and the necklace my mother once gave me. I didn't lock the drawer. Some silences are final, but not bitter, just necessary. Later that evening, Lena fell asleep beside me on the couch, a picture book still open across her chest. The golden light of the living room framed her face, stronger now, pink back in her cheeks. I looked over at the shelf across the room, where we'd placed the first plaque from the foundation's ribbon-cutting ceremony. Naomi had chosen the inscription. It read, "There is light in silence. There is justice in quiet." Lucille Whitmore. My mother would have smiled, and maybe, just maybe, so would he. It was a soft morning, the kind where light comes in slow and quiet, like it's not trying to wake you, just gently reminding you, you're still here. Lena sat across from me at the kitchen table, her legs tucked up on the chair, sipping warm apple tea like it was something sacred. She'd been out of the hospital for 3 weeks. The shadows under her eyes were almost gone, replaced by a glow that reminded me of the little girl she used to be, before diagnosis, before monitors, before the silence of sterile rooms. She looked at me carefully, studying my face like she could still see something broken in it. Then she asked, "Did we win, Mama?" I didn't answer right away. I stirred my tea and listened to the birds outside, as if they could lend me the words. "No," I said gently. "We didn't win." Her eyebrows pulled together. I reached out and brushed a curl from her forehead. "But you, my brave girl, you came back to the light. That's worth more than winning." She nodded, like she understood more than her years should allow. Then she smiled. And it wasn't just any smile, it was my mother's. Lucille's, quiet, knowing, lit from within. And in that moment, I didn't need applause, or headlines, or revenge. Just this, my daughter safe, my heart steady, and a truth I could carry forward. Some fights aren't about victory. They're about light, about holding on to it and refusing to let go. Even when everything around you goes dark. Before we say goodbye, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning like mine, with tea or coffee and the smell of something comforting in the air? Or is it late at night, where stories like this keep you company when the world feels too loud? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one, with care, with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, I ask you, stay with us. Subscribe to this channel, not just to hear more stories like mine, but to be part of a community that still believes in things like kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, whatever you're facing, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, the miracle doesn't always knock loud. Sometimes it waits quietly until your heart is ready to open the door. Take care. I'll see you in the next story.